What I want to do is go through the terminology from the chapter on setting. And as I do that, I'm going to be talking about Araby as an example, so you'll be able to fill out that first column as we go through the different parts of setting. Now, setting is not something new. I know you've been talking about setting for a long time, but what's happening in this class is that we're sort of doing a deeper dive into each one of these topics with maybe a few more terms, or at least breaking things into smaller sections and that kind of thing. So as I go through the reading assignment from the text, just make sure you have good notes. The whole goal is not to have good, beautiful notes. The goal is to be able to make really interesting observations about these things in a new piece of literature when I give it to you, right? So there is a note about setting in the first page there, and they break it down into three main sections, right? Historical, geographical, and physical setting. So we'll take them separately, and we'll talk about them on the chart as we go through, right? So the first one that is discussed is historical setting. Do you always know the historical setting in a piece of literature? No. What's a piece that we've read where we really don't know what year it could possibly be? We probably couldn't even make a guess. Well, I'm going to say 20th century. Araby is early 20th century. Nightingale and the Rose, right? That could be 1960, it could have been yesterday, it could have been 1500, right? So that's kind of blank on purpose. So setting is sometimes very specific and sometimes kind of general. And the author makes those choices as they're making the piece. So historical setting means, if you can pick up clues about the time period when the story is supposedly taking place, then you can get some information about the characters, the way they act, their environment, their culture, things like that. The example that they use is from Yellow Wallpaper. I know sometimes they're going to use examples in the book that you haven't read, but for the most part, they will tend to use examples that you have read. So the historical period has to do with the customs of a time period. Araby happens when? Early 20th century, like turn of the 20th century, so over 100 years ago. So when we're filling out, you could put an author, right? The author of Araby is James Joyce. Historical setting is turn of the century, turn of the 20th century. So for us, that's over 100 years ago. There's certain things that people did 100 years ago, even though it's relatively close in history compared to, dinosaurs. But there's certain things people did 100 years ago that we don't do anymore. There's certain things that work the other way as well. So we can't really put our 21st century mindset onto the characters in a story from 100 years ago because they're living in a different time with different expectations. So when we say that little boy in Araby is a little stalkery, right, as he's watching the girl out the window that he's got in mind for himself, yeah, today that would be stalkery because he's like staring at her out the window. And the reason that seems stalkery to us is maybe because we can stalk people without them even knowing. We can just look at their digital footprint, right? We can send a drone up in the air. We can follow them or not follow them on social media and look at what they're posting anyway. We can see who their friends are and all that stuff, and they would never even know. But 100 years ago, they didn't have that option. So we kind of have to leave it open that even though today we might think that he's a little, maybe stalker in the making, maybe 100 years ago that wasn't the case. And we have to kind of give our characters a little bit of the benefit of the doubt sometimes and leave that open unless we know exactly what things were like, 100 years ago. So what else can we say about the historical setting? It's gloomy and sad, and that probably has to do more with the physical setting that's described, so we'll get to that when we get to the third one. All right, let's move on to geographical setting. So geographical setting has to do with as much as we know about where physically the story is taking place, right? Are we reading a story that is in Germany? Are we reading a story that is at the South Pole? Where is this story taking place, right? So we have to know, is it United States? Because, again, the cultures could be different. Different cultural norms happen in different locations. Even within a country, there are different cultural norms, right? I mean, you could travel around in the United States and find different ways of approaching things and things that are acceptable and things that are not acceptable. And if you've traveled a lot, you know that. Even if you haven't traveled that, you might know that. I'll give you some examples because I'm originally from 2,000 miles away. And I moved here, 27 years ago? 28 years ago? A lot of years ago. So one of the things that I noticed when I moved to the Valley is a couple of sort of, I don't know if they're cultural or just regional, but one of them is touching people. Okay, not ew. Not ew. I don't mean that people are always touching each other. I mean it's a cultural norm in the Valley. If you compliment somebody or if you kind of look at something and envy it, you have to touch it, right? Because what's going to happen if you don't? Right. So here's the thing that I didn't grow up with that. That's not an all-over concept. So when I moved to the Valley, I would say to the lady, say I'm in the line at HEB, and the lady's there, and her kid's sitting in the cart. I'd say, oh, what a cute little baby. And she would just look at me. Because what she's waiting for me to touch his little hand or, like on his little cheek or something like that, because she's waiting for me to take care of business. Right? I did not know. So I would just smile. And I guess she was thinking, oh, that white lady doesn't know she's supposed to touch my kid. Right? So if you tried to touch a baby where I'm from that is not a baby that you are related to or know well, they call the police. Right? Why are you touching my kid? Get your hands off my kid. Right? They don't have that. It's not something that's in the cultural mentality in that place. It's not good or bad. It's just a different mentality. It's just a different place. But you need to know that if you're ever going to move, right? Or if you're reading a story that takes place in a different place. What if somebody reads a story about characters that are in the Valley and they don't understand that cultural norm? Right? So it's the same way with us when we read a story about Ireland at the turn of the century. We can't know every place and every time what their cultural norms are. Right? Another thing is Easter eggs. Right? Easter eggs for me are, well, not anymore because I've lived here longer than I lived in Michigan, but Easter eggs for me are hard-boiled eggs. The egg is still in it. You color it and you hide them, and children find them and you eat them. That's Easter eggs. You can sometimes get those plastic ones, and when you open them, there's like coins in it or candy or something like that. But we don't have cascarones. It doesn't happen. You go north of San Antonio, and you're not really going to find that. No, you don't smash them on your head. You eat them. I'll tell you. I sent some to my niece and nephew when they were little. Because I thought, oh, how fun. They're going to have a lot of fun. It'll be something new that they've never done before. And so I went to HEB, because you can buy them all over when it's coming up to Easter. And I sent them some, and they opened them. They didn't know what to do with it. And so I kind of explained it to them, and they're like, so you smash it on the person's head, and then what? I said, well, you rub it in so that all the confetti kind of gets embedded in their hair, and it's fun, and you laugh, and whatever. And if you're mean, you get the ones with the mustard and the flour and all that stuff, right? And they just went, what? Why would you do that? What does that have to do with Easter? I don't get it. And we're going to go out and get our eggs and put them in our basket now. Thank you. And that's what they did. They didn't do them because they couldn't. It wasn't something that seemed natural to them. So, I mean, what I'm saying is we kind of have to leave a door open a little bit when we get these characters, because we don't know what their experiences are, and things that seem normal to them might not be normal to us. So that's part of setting when we think of geography, too, right? The norms and the way people behave. So let's put under geographical setting on Araby, Ireland. All right? That story takes place in Dublin, Ireland. The significance of that? Well, as soon as I put the historical and the geographical together, then my brain has to go to world history. Because James Joyce is setting us up for a poverty story. Turn of the century in Ireland, was the potato famine. Have you heard of it?
Yes.
Okay. This is where like the fabric of your education starts to come into play, and you can start to use the things that you already know. So this little boy is living in a time when his people are about to pretty much starve. So all they did was eat potatoes because they were plentiful. But how nutritious is a potato? Well, if you put the brisket and you can get the protein going, right? But they didn't have any of that, so they just literally ate potatoes. And if you're just eating potatoes 24/7, you're pretty much going to not have much nutrition. You're going to be malnourished. So same thing if I gave you white rice all the time and that's all you ate. Your stomach would be full, like you wouldn't have pains in your stomach, but you wouldn't be getting the nutrients and the vitamins and stuff that you need to have from that. So if I think about him as an orphan, during this historical time, in this geographical location, I can start to see a significance come up. And I can start to say these things that I know about where the story is taking place help me to understand that there's a poverty going on. And so when he asks his uncle for money, it's a big deal. If you don't have anything, then asking for something is almost an impossibility, even if it's just a trivial amount. So when he is disappointed that his uncle doesn't give him more money, he can't say anything about it. He can't say, hey, why can't I have a 20, right? Because he's living in a time when things are very, very scarce. And so he's lucky that he got that at all. And there's a couple coins in his pocket. But he still has the hope to go out and get something for this girl. So even in that kind of desolate situation, that setting, he's still able to, keep some hope. Well, until the end of the story, right? Until the end. When it doesn't really work out and he loses all of his hope, probably, or most of it. All right, so flipping to the back. Physical setting is the next one that they talk about in your text. Physical setting has to do with, bless you, the time of the year, the time of day. Are we indoors? Are we outdoors? And stories could have multiple physical settings, right? So a story could partially be during the day, partially at night. We see that in Araby. There are scenes where he's at school, and then there's scenes where, like when they're playing at the beginning, when it's nighttime, like the sun's just going down and the dusk is happening. And at the end, same thing. It's evening and it's dark. So as soon as I start thinking about that physical setting in Araby, and you can mark that in on your chart, I start thinking, wow, it's kind of weird that James Joyce would start the story in an almost dark setting. He's playing outside, right? And the lights are going on. He's supposed to go in and eat dinner. And then end the story in about the same time of day. Right about the time things are going to get dark. Well, of course they're going to get dark because he's growing up. If it was going to be a sunshine, playful little kid story, we would have sunshine, little, bumblebees flying around, little daffodils and flowers and all that cute stuff, some rainbows and unicorns cavorting around. But we don't. We get starting with the dark and ending with the dark because he's got to face adulthood, which, I don't know if it's dark, but it's definitely got a lot more responsibility to it. And a lot more, nuance. We try to shelter little kids, don't we? People are always asking me, why are all the stories in literature, so depressing? Well, they are because they're more interesting, right? It's more complex. Besides, we spent all those years telling you stories about teddy bears and little mice and fields, and what happens? They have some setback, but they're going to end up, happier at the end or something. They learned a lesson, and now everybody's happy. And these stories aren't necessarily like that because they're more mature. And so in his darkness, he realizes that you can't get by with just hope. Wah, wah. So that's when I can start to overlap meaning with setting, right? Same thing with seasons. It's typical in literature to think about the season if it's presented where the story takes place. What season is it in Araby? Fall. Yeah, it's autumn. So when we talk about the cycle of seasons, of course it's a cycle, so it keeps revolving, but spring is a time of birth, renewal, new life, youth. Y'all are in the springtime of your lives right now. I'm not going to try to identify with the season right now. Then comes summer, right? Where the burgeoning and the maturing happens of all that new growth that happened in the spring. We don't have seasons as much in the valley, but I'm sure you have a concept of seasons. Sometimes we get snow every, 10 years or 100 years or whatever. Yeah, so then the summer is like the maturity of all that springtime stuff. That's going to be like your adulthood years. Then you have autumn, which is sort of like the declining years as you get older. I don't think I'm there yet. I think I'm sort of like 1 foot in summer and 1 foot in autumn. Kind of like the weather outside right now. Autumn is like, coming down from that youthful, moment in life and sort of coming into age. And then winter, of course, everything dies. Well, not so much in the valley, but when it snows, it kills everything, right? Yeah. So, I'm not going to try to put years to that because I think it's kind of individual. Depends on your outlook on life. But yeah, I can't run like I used to run anymore because, my knee and my hip doesn't do that anymore, right? So it's kind of like, you start to realize these things as you grow older and you say, well, maybe autumn is creeping up on me. So poets and writers think about these things when they craft their stories. And so if I think about Araby now, it starts off in autumn. Well, where's it going to go from autumn? Later into autumn. Death, yeah. And so it's like the death of his youth. It's the death of his dreams. And that's exactly what we experience. So in a way, remember we read that passage over the summer about how do you know when these things are happening, right? In a way, James Joyce gave us a lot of clues about that sad ending. And it shouldn't have been a surprise to us. Well, now it's not a surprise to us, right? It was autumn. The sun's going down at the beginning. The sun's going down at the end, just like the sun's going down in his youth. He's moving into summer. And, summer's beautiful, but it also has its responsibilities. I know you don't like to think about that because you're in the same spot, right? Yeah, that's why I had to be out on Tuesday. I had to go get my teeth worked on because autumn, right? And then my cat needed his shots, and then I had to get an x-ray of my broken foot, and just had to do all that stuff. So, yeah, I would have rather have been here, but Pepper had to get his shots. All right, so did you feel in a spot for the physical setting? The last two terms are really in that last paragraph. Atmosphere and mood. And sometimes people interchange those two, so I do want to address them briefly, and then you could put them also on your chart. So atmosphere and mood have to do with what the setting is giving off, like how we take it or how characters take it. So the atmosphere is like the combined feeling of the setting. We could say that the setting in Araby is depressing. It is. City environment. Cities at the turn of the 20th century, there were no rules about, like exhaust systems or what soot was in the air and all that stuff. Dark. So we can get depressing for sure from all of the setting clues in that story. And guess what? Depressing goes with the ending, and it goes with that little boy. And as much as we wanted to carry that chalice around, right, and be successful in his quest, everything James Joyce is telling us in the subtext of the story is telling us not going to happen. Same thing in 56-0, by the way. You should have known that story was going to end up like that. But society has conditioned you to think about the happy football success story at the end, right? Like Rudy and all those movies. He's gonna survive and they're gonna do great. Well, they're already like hobbling around Huh?
How did they get hurt? Like, was it from the previous game?
Because they have not won a football game in like 8 years or something.
They were super. Because like in the previous games, like they would always play the same spots.
Right. Well, plus, if it's not a winning program, then they're not going to draw solid players to their program, right? All the top players are going to go to more successful programs, so they just perpetuate that. But yeah, when we get to 56-0, we're going to have to talk about that, because I was reading some people's notes. And yeah, I get that he's motivational, but he's also asking them to do something that's unfair. If you have broken bones and somebody wants you to go play a football game against a team that is your toughest opponent for the whole season, that's lifetime injury time. Yeah. That's arthritis at 30 time. So what he's asking them to do isn't just, come on, boys, we can do it. Because he already knows they're not going to win. He just doesn't want it to be as bad as 56-0. Maybe. Maybe a little 50-50 there, possibly. But what happens at the end? You could put this in on 56-0, right? What happens at the end? What's our last image of that football player guy, Ray Arthur Larry Pete? The snow. He's collapsed, face down on the field. Everybody's gone, and the snow is slowly obliterating him. Well, talk about your seasonal clues. His life is over. He even imagines it. He imagines being married to some, slug-like woman or slug-like children or something like that, right? Yeah, his glory days were his losing football record. Yeah. But this is how authors manipulate us, right? And setting is a big way to do it. All right, so atmosphere on Araby. Depressing. Evidence, you can go back into the text, right? You can work on some partners as you're working through these charts. You can find quotes. Maybe you go to the end when all the lights are turning off in Araby, right? And talk about how that created an atmosphere of closing, ending, stopping. Now, mood is different from atmosphere because mood is what we feel as readers or a character feels within the atmosphere. So the atmosphere is created by all of the description that the author uses. And then the mood is how we feel as a result of that. Right? So the mood that we get in Araby is maybe one of hopelessness at the end. Now we know logically there are going to be moments of hope. There's not, a door that shuts on hope and it's either open or closed. That door opens and closes throughout life. But at the end of this story, it seems pretty hopeless for this kid. So you can make a note in your notes where you took notes from the text, I guess, and maybe that will help you identify between atmosphere and mood. A character can have a mood, and a reader can have a mood. A story has an atmosphere. Does that help? So you can either talk about the mood of the boy at the end of the story, which I think we could say disheartened, despair. He even says that, right? Yeah. Despair. Or you can talk about the mood of the general audience, like the person, the reader. And you can go with that if you want to. Which is definitely down. Reminds us that we're not going to be successful all the time in our endeavors either. Nobody is. They never really continue with it because they're practicing, so they really get going and then they stop. All right, so questions on any of the setting material? Anything you want me to go over? After that, in the text is just that checklist, which I really like in our book. So if I asked you to analyze the setting of the story that you're reading over the weekend, these are the questions you would ask to do more than just surface level thinking about the setting. Because what we've been talking about, everything we've been putting on the chart, has this part where it's like, okay, why is that significant? Writers don't do things for no reason. There's always like some significance. Now the trick is, how do you reveal that without making stuff up? Right? Because it's tempting. Well, you don't have to search it up. You're going to get better at figuring it out on your own. But like, as soon as I say the beginning and the end of Araby are both the end, it kind of makes sense what happens in the story then, right? Like what he's doing with the darkness falling is symbolic. And you don't need to look it up anywhere to figure that out.
Because in the coins, I forgot what the name of
The florins?
Yeah, I searched them up and they said that it was like
Yeah, they're just an older form of their money because of the time period, yeah.
So that's why I was like, oh, can you put that?
You can put that for sure, yeah. Look up things that you don't know, but what I'm saying is you can't make up reasons for things that there's no textual evidence for it. Like the real temptation is to say, yeah, and he's probably going to go on. He might marry somebody, but he's going to get divorced because he's going to be depressed his whole life. Like you can't say that stuff because James Joyce doesn't give that to us. We have to just stick with what's in the pages of the text. Right? So there's interpretation and then there's like speculation, and that's two different things. All right, so I'm going to give you the rest of the time today to work on your chart. You can partner up with somebody if you want, or make a little group of 3 and continue through. The only one you can't do right now is the story of an hour, because that's the one that you have for homework. All right, but you should be able to do it by the time you come in on Monday.
So we're going to finish this today?
Well, let's see if we can.
Oh,
Yeah.
so that's much of the day.
Okay, yeah, so maybe this is the class I haven't talked. I don't collect every little thing. I feel like if you understand why we're doing this, then later when I test you by giving you a new story, then you can do it. And that's what matters to me more than looking at a piece of paper to see if you wrote on it. Does that make sense? Yes. I feel like it's a little more mature way to handle class. I mean, I don't think, maybe when you're younger, it's like you have to have the check marks and every little thing has to have a grade, but I'm not going to give you anything that's not feeding into the final result. I'm not going to give you something to do just to keep you busy or anything like that. So this is, I probably won't collect it. I'll probably give you another one next week on theme or whatever it is that we're going to do next. And then you can study this when it's time to do the semester exam, because you know I'm going to ask you to comment on the setting of that story. And this will give you enough background to give you ideas about how you can approach that in a new story. Does that make sense? Okay. I'm trying to treat you like college students. It's college class. It's supposed to happen. So I don't have to collect every little... But see, then if I say that, there's always somebody who's like, well, then I guess I don't have to do it. No, you don't. But I'm saying if you want to be successful in the end result, I think thinking through this with a partner would be a good thing to do. You know what I mean? Like, are you only doing things because I'm collecting it, or because it's a good thing to do, right? Yeah. Yes, you may.